Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass, welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to the latest installment of Sherlock and the Curious Critic. As we take our first steps into what is likely Sherlock's final season, we are confronted with a difficult story for both the characters and the audience in the Six Thatchers. With Sherlock back at Baker Street searching for what Moriarty's final message means, and John and Mary's life changing with the birth of their daughter, an investigation into the mysterious theft of Margaret Thatcher statues puts all that on hold, and tests the capabilities of the great detective and the relationships he's forged and holds dear. Hey look, I'm finally getting around to covering season 4! You guys in the pre-100 sub club might remember this is sort of a thing. Back when season 4 was airing, I did first impressions videos on each episode, with the intention of doing a full-on review of them once the whole season had concluded. But then the reaction to season 4 started to become more widespread, and it was... well... As I explained in the last few installments, Sherlock was already starting to face certain criticisms by the time season 3 had come and gone, some justified, some not, but all very intense. And it only got worse with season 4. So I got scared to face the vitriolic response and dropped the script. Especially considering I didn't hate season 4. Now don't get me wrong, season 4 has issues, more than the other seasons as we'll go over in these last few installments, but I never thought it deserved the overwhelming hate it got. With time and reflection and reaching the point where nobody really cares if someone doesn't have an overly passionate reaction to season 4 one way or the other, I feel confident enough to fulfill that promise I made to give season 4 the full Let's Talk About treatment. So, let's see what we got. At first, it's mostly back to business as usual, getting a fun look into the last several months after Moriarty's message, which we can do since Sherlock is off the hook for the whole Magnuson incident thanks to the magic of video editing. And either Sherlock is very, very happy to not be flying off on a suicide mission anymore, or he is still very high after the events of the Abominable Bride. It's not quite clear. Either way, it felt really good to be back into the groove after almost 3 years without a new season, getting a traditional, energetic case montage while mixing in some new changes, like John and Mary's baby Rosamund. Kind of an unusual name, not a reference as far as I can tell, but okay. Thankfully, Rosie treads the fine line of shifting the status quo slightly while not being overly intrusive or having our main characters run off all the time as if she doesn't exist. Both can kind of get on my nerves, so I'm glad they found a nice middle ground in such uncharted territory for a Sherlock Holmes story. Another well-integrated change is seeing Mary regularly involved in the casework, watching her sitting with clients, calling on cases, and even getting to accompany the boys from time to time, with Abington's chemistry with our two leads still being off the charts. I still love how much Mary is welcome and incorporated into the casework now that everything's out in the open about her. This version of Mary has stood out since day one, and it's great to see the show really embrace what they've created. I look forward to seeing that only get stronger over the course of the season. What? Another character who gets highlighted quite a bit is, surprisingly, Lestrade. Yeah, he's been kind of MIA for a while. Oh, he's been around, just not as engaged with the rest of the group in the last couple of episodes. He gets a lot more to do here, and it gives Rupert Graves a chance to stretch his legs again and remind us why he is yet another perfect casting choice this show has made. I found a lot of his scenes really memorable, like how he talks for a bit about the case where he met Sherlock. Now that's a story I would have liked to have seen on the show proper. And when Sherlock offers for him to take the credit for the latest case, not at all unusual for Sherlock Holmes, Lestrade brings up this point.
You say that, and then John blogs about it, and you get all the credit anyway. Yeah, he's got a point.
It's another one of those things that once I heard it, I couldn't believe someone hadn't pointed out that little discrepancy in the Holmes canon before Sherlock. There's a lot of self-aware humor in the first half of this outing anyway. I think they were having way too much fun being back. Speaking of the casework, there's some fun stuff where that's concerned. On top of the montage, we get a smaller case before we get into the major focus of the episode. Not much to say about it, but I always like when they sprinkle smaller cases into the narrative. It can help keep investment during the longer runtime. This one comes with a traditional elaborate recap like in the original stories, and it's a solid mystery for the time we spend on it. Where the main mystery is concerned, that's a bit more complicated. Sherlock's been spending months powering through work while searching for the link that led Moriarty to leave that message. And he thinks he's found that link when he gets an eerie feeling around a broken statue. But why? Well, we'll get to that, but right now I want to highlight the significance of that statue. This episode is partially inspired by the classic story, The Six Napoleons, a middle-of-the-road classic with an intriguing premise, except instead of investigating the connection between statues of Napoleon, it's Margaret Thatcher. Interesting choice. I'm sure someone more well-versed in politics than me could make a witty remark here. Well, at least Napoleon gets a name drop.
Thatcher's like, I don't know, Napoleon now. Yes.
Since we're mentioning the original, this seems like a good time to check out what references to the classic stories the show came back with in our segment. Bit of a sparser section than usual, but the references that are here are pretty heavy hitters. But let's breeze through some of the smaller ones. On top of the story being a play on the Six Napoleons, the treasure that is revealed to be in the bust at the end of that story, the Bourgeois Pearl, is mentioned several times when Sherlock is on the case. The opening montage has references to both the adventure of the retired colorman, with mention of paint being used to mask another smell, and the engineer's thumb by... well, I think you can figure that out. Sadly, while John does write about these cases on screen, the official blog had stopped updating after the sign of 3, so the full stories behind these modern cases will remain a mystery. Later on, Sherlock meets with a client who Sherlock deduces quite a bit from. Some of these deductions are very similar to the main client in the Red-Headed League. The man even makes almost the exact same remark as the original client, which was a funny touch I really liked.
I thought you'd done something clever. No, but now you've explained it. It's dead simple, isn't it?
A recurring theme in the episode is a telling of the story, The Appointment in Samara, a story about a man who tried to cheat death but only led to his demise. We'll come back to its significance later, but Sherlock apparently hates the story, and Mycroft mentions that he rewrote the story when he was a kid where the man made it out alright, renaming it An Appointment in Sumatra. Those of you who saw my Empty Hearse review will remember the significance of Sumatra. Kinda weird they bring it up again here, but whatever. What's really important in terms of callbacks is the Sherlock introduction of Toby. Toby was a tracker dog that Holmes recruited in The Sign of 4. If you haven't read that story, you might remember his appearance in The Great Mouse Detective. This is one a lot of people, including myself, were anxiously hoping for. People really like Toby, and I like that they included the classic misdirect of John thinking Toby is a person when it's a dog. And he's a very good dog. Yes, he is. You go and help Sherlock Holmes find some murderers. Good boy. It is kind of a shame that Toby doesn't wind up contributing anything of significance, getting lured into a dead end while tracking, but it's Toby, so it was still great to have him involved. Speaking of The Sign of 4, here's one I should have brought up back in his last vow. The flash drive containing all of the info on Mary's past has the initials Agra on it. This is taken from the name of the treasure Agra in that story. Why am I mentioning this now? Well, let's just say that little memory stick is suddenly going to become much more important again. But before I get into why that is, I want to go back to the case, concerning how Sherlock winds up on the Six Thatchers' path to begin with, through intuition, I think. The first bust has no significance to the case they were working on at the time. Sherlock just notices that it's missing and becomes fixated on it due to this overwhelming sense of dread around it. It's really strange. I know Sherlock is known for being cryptic at times, but that usually comes with a full-on explanation for his train of thought later. Here, the moment never comes. It's just labeled as Sherlock using the observation of the out of place to signify its importance. Again, I think this thought process is weird and not at all clear. When they do try to explain it, it only gets worse too. And when it's the catalyst for the entire premise of the episode, that's not a good sign. The rest of the episode carries this foreboding air to it that's really unusual to the show, with Sherlock being transfixed on this case involving the statues, and the constant visual cues calling back to the appointment in Samara tale. The only time I could think of it there was this overwhelming presence enveloping the events was with Moriarty, and Moriarty earned that shadow on Legacy alone. At least then you could pin it to a person. This is the kind of constant presence that Magnuson should have had, really. I mean, Sherlock for a while thinks this whole thing has to do with Moriarty. Why? I couldn't tell ya. He claims it's because it's too strange to not be him, but I've been following your adventures for quite some time, Mr. Holmes. This is not even in the top 10 of your strangest cases. But to its credit, this line of thinking does give us glimpses into Sherlock's ego, something we haven't really seen for a while. This idea that this has to be connected to Moriarty because he's been spending all this time searching for the master plan that is connected to that miss me message. Again, why this is the thing he connects that to is anyone's guess, but at least we get an answer to the importance of these things fairly quickly, when Sherlock confronts the man trying to steal the last statue. Sherlock's fight with the burglar is definitely more elaborate action than we're used to from Sherlock. Using fast-paced stuff like this tends to be saved for chase scenes. It's a moment that definitely stands out, but whether it's in a good way or a bad way depends on who you ask. Me? I thought it was cool. And just when Sherlock and the audience thinks he'll find that pearl in the statue, like in the Six Napoleons, that turned out to be a misdirect for the real treasure. Another flash drive exactly like Mary's, belonging to the thief and one of Mary's former operatives from her agent days, AJ, played by Sacha Dhawan. You know, the master. Now, despite some of the strange directions they took us on to get to this case, for the most part, it's been pretty fun, if standard, Sherlock fare. A good return to form after so much time away, and the experimentation of the Abominable Bride. But this is where things start to get difficult. Remember how I said His Last Vow felt like it was trying to tell two stories at once? Well, after the flash drive is discovered, the tone and focus of the episode completely changes, and it feels like we jump straight into a totally different episode. Focusing on Mary trying to right this wrong with one of her former teammates who wants her dead due to a misunderstanding of a mission gone wrong. Now, I've made it very clear that I love the changes Sherlock made to Mary's character. She's vastly more interesting than she ever has been, and it brought some fresh blood into the show. However, I'm not sure how I feel about learning this much about her past. Usually, I'm not against taking away the mystery of a concept. If you got something cool to show me, show it. I'm one of the 5 Doctor Who fans who doesn't mind that the Weeping Angel's lore gets more complicated every time they're brought back. But after His Last Vow was ready to just let her past be her business and move on with her just being a cool character with a weird skill set, I was content with just leaving it at that. As much as I love Mary, I really wasn't invested in this conflict, or at least with how much it takes over the episode from this point on. I think it might be because the lead-in doesn't do much to facilitate the payoff. This is very similar to what His Last Vow did, and His Last Vow did it way better. And I really do not care about AJ. I don't know if this episode wants us to sympathize with him or not. He's a man who was tortured and nearly killed for no reason whatsoever, but being too consumed by his misdirected desire for revenge that he can't be reasoned with no matter how hard the group tries. It's trying to be tragic, and Dhawan is doing some great work here. I mean, it's Sacha Dhawan, so no surprise there, but something about it just never really clicked with me. All that said, this change in direction is not without its compelling or engaging elements. After Mary realizes what's going on, she runs off to lure AJ away so she can reason with him and keep her family safe. It's a sequence that gives Amanda Abington a lot of fun material. It's pretty cool seeing Mary go into full spy mode. And if Mark Gatiss didn't think we'd see his sneaky Private Life of Sherlock Holmes reference on one of Mary's fake IDs, I saw it, Gatiss, and I appreciate it. Also, while I question how well this is all executed on a story level, and I do think it's faulty at best, there is some stuff to be admired on the character level when it comes to Mary. It feels like it builds on what we saw of Mary's feelings and actions back in His Last Vow, of wanting to deal with the problems concerning her past herself, whether it's Magnuson or AJ, not wanting those she loves to see that ugly side of her life. In this case, running off to do everything in her power to preserve her new life while trying to deal with the consequences of her past. That's the good stuff, as is when Sherlock and John eventually catch up with her. Just when I thought they were going to pull the deducing the possibilities of the universe crap again, they gave a plausible reason for how Sherlock tracked Mary down. Although I question why this episode thought that was a perfectly plausible explanation in the first half, while openly mocking it in the second half. Jeez, this episode is a mess. We haven't even gotten to the big stuff yet. Well, whatever the reason, it's a sign of Sherlock's dedication to keep that promise he made back in season 3. Once he realizes what all this is really about, that single-minded dedication of his is targeted on keeping that vow, and using everything at his disposal to help Mary. You know he's putting determination ahead of pride when he consults Mycroft multiple times to find the solution. Thankfully, he doesn't do his globe-trotting alone this time, and once again stops the investigation in its tracks so John and Mary can work this out amongst themselves. I will remind you all that Sherlock is the one who continuously gets these two to talk to each other like adults, and hell has not frozen over. However, the big conversation here is around trust, something that John has faced multiple times over the course of the show, that he asked Mary to work through things with him even when they aren't his problems to solve, rather than go behind his back and keep more secrets even if it's for a good reason. It's all in line with what we've dealt with before. John and Sherlock want to help her, she just has to let them. But this whole thing about John lecturing about trust is a bit hollow, thanks to what we learn in a minute, but before I get into that, there's a smaller way the story screwed John over that I want to point out. In the confrontation with AJ, John has got Mary's back, being stealthy and ready to shoot AJ if he steps out of line, until AJ gets shot down by a random cop off the street. Seriously? Not only could John doing that for Mary have driven home how they can count on each other in a situation like this, but shooting the things wanting to kill his friends and loved ones is kind of John's thing. Why would you take that away? Oh, but that's not all they did with John. There might still be a case to solve, but I need to air this out before we go any further. There's this subplot hinted at through most of the episode until we get to a big old flashback with John showing how he was flirting with another woman behind Mary's back. I hated this subplot so much. It might be my most despised anything in Sherlock. Now, to be fair, I kinda get the thought process. 3 continents Watson with an addiction to dangerous situations is practically a cocktail for infidelity. However, this is in direct conflict with some of John's best traits, his honesty and his integrity. With that and how much John has been through to get where he is now, I just don't see him going off the honest path for something so frivolous. Being happily married, able to work through all the bizarre problems they faced, and accepting that he's not the well-adjusted one he thought he was, makes me feel like the character traits that would make this possible shouldn't be there anymore. Or at least not as strongly. John worked so hard to get this life. He has a loving family and still works with Sherlock regularly. He has love, he has excitement. He's chosen these people despite everything they've been through. Having a small symbol from Rosie that reminds him what a good, full life he has now, and then he does the thing that could ruin that anyway. I cannot see him even entertaining the idea of throwing that all away for what kind of momentary thrill he'd get from pursuing this woman. In theory, I'm not against Mary putting John on a pedestal and presenting John's flaws to counter that, because he's not perfect by any stretch. He has a temper, he's reckless, and can be short-sighted to the point of not even considering the idea of hearing the other's opinion. And again, in fairness, it doesn't go too far to the point that John is unforgivable. He just talks to the girl secretly, nothing more. But it all just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and not in the way I think the episode wanted it to. After how much they put John and Mary through, and still have them affirm their commitments to each other, I just don't think John messing around with another woman was the way to humble him in the eyes of Mary, himself, or the audience. Ugh, that's all I've got on that bit for now. Let's get back to the case. Because even with AJ gone, there's still the question of who sabotaged that mission all those years ago. Will they come after Mary like he did? Doesn't even matter as much as everyone seems to think it does.
We will explain later.
But we do get another appearance by Lady Smallwood from His Last Vow, played by Lindsay Duncan, as a supposed suspect. It doesn't turn out to be her, but it was great to see her again. She was a great character, and it was cool to see her upgraded to recurring character status. The eventual reveal of who is behind all this is clever and underwhelming all at the same time. A woman named Vivian Norbury, played by Marsha Warren, who we saw as a stenographer in the opening scene of the episode, and then never heard about again. It reminds me a bit of the twist in The Sign of Three, someone often overlooked, but using their invisibility to their advantage. It's still a good idea, but it didn't quite land with me in the same way Small did in that episode. When I realized this connection, I tried to figure out what was different this time. I think it came down to the fact that she was just a little too invisible. When I first watched this, it took me a couple minutes to remember who the heck she was. In The Sign of Three, for example, there were hints and clues to make sure you knew this was all connected to a greater whole. Here, it's all about misdirecting. We're looking for Moriarty, so these statues must be connected to him. Oh, no, it's about Mary, but it's also about AJ. But AJ was wrong, so it might be about Smallwood. But that was a misdirect because it's really about this lady who really likes ice lollies.
Everybody got that?
No, I don't, Dark Helmet. It's too much misdirect and not enough focus in guiding the viewer to the solution. It's the same problem I have with how Sherlock sees the importance in the statues. The ideas are there, but the execution is off. I think it's just the way it's told and how much it jumps around without much to connect the events that makes it lackluster. But the episode does give a solid attempt to make up for this from a character standpoint again, making Norbury's situation feel connected to the position Mary keeps finding herself in. Someone with a sketchy past trying to keep it hidden and move on. Norbury is an old woman who wasn't selling out secrets like she was in her past under the government's noses anymore. She just wanted to move on, but then AJ came along and stirred the whole thing up again. Sherlock even hits below the belt deduction-wise by emphasizing how all that clever scheming, being able to outsmart several intelligence agencies for her own gain, didn't lead to any long-term fulfillment. Now where have I seen this before? This to me is another instance of a recurring theme in the series that I'm going to hold off and elaborate on in another episode. I'm sure it's annoying that I keep saying that, and I'm sorry, but just bear with me, okay? It mostly plays on this theme the episode is going for, that you can't outrun the inevitable, repeating that damn merchant story that everyone knows now for some reason.
I was once a merchant in a famous market in Baghdad.
You like that? It's a callback to something I didn't even hear!
This feels like it's leading to Sherlock's arrogance at being on top of this whole affair, despite how many times it slipped out from under him during the investigation, being rewarded by him getting shot by a little old lady. And that egotism is punished, but not in the way anyone expected.
Surprise!
Mary sacrifices herself to save Sherlock's life. Let me tell you. After almost 4 years of reflection, seeing what came of this, and quite a few rewatches this last year, I still don't know how I feel about this decision. On a surface level, this is sort of keeping in line with the books. Mary did die in the 3-year gap that Holmes was presumed dead. We never find out how, and it's only mentioned in a generous throwaway line, because, quite frankly, there was really no reason to care about Mary. After Watson and Mary got married, the fact that Mary was still a part of the stories was trivia at best. Outside of letting Watson go out with his eccentric buddy for the weekend, Mary had no involvement in the stories after her debut. So really, killing her was just taking away an element that held something back rather than added anything. Namely, that with Mary gone, Holmes and Watson could room at Baker Street again, which was the iconic status quo that readers knew and loved. And if Mary had been that way when they brought her into Sherlock, I feel like I'd be way less torn up about this and accepted it as them following the written material. But she wasn't. Abington, Moffat, and Gatiss completely reinvented the character into someone witty, perceptive, and accepting. A character who only became more compelling when she was revealed to have a strange backstory, a past that came with a set of skills that were perfect for what Sherlock and John do on a daily basis. She wasn't just the woman splitting the best bros apart, she was someone who fit into their lives perfectly and became a natural and welcome part of this bizarre family. After spending all that time making Mary so much cooler than she ever has been, to integrate her so flawlessly into the main cast, to make the most iconic crime-fighting pair in fiction an effective triple threat, becoming part of a family dynamic that, to me at least, seemed to be all about second chances at a fulfilling life for unconventional people, only to take that away, still doesn't really sit right with me. Now, on the other hand, the fact that Mary was such a great character makes this all the more tragic. The death scene itself is very effective, sending me into a state of shock similar to what the characters were feeling. The performances are exceptional as well, full of love, grief, and anger all at the same time. It really works. But like the written stories before it feels like they were trying to shift back to the traditional status quo, which on some level I sympathize with. Sherlock Holmes stories are going to be about Holmes and Watson first and foremost. They always have been, they always will be. But unlike Mary in the original stories, I feel she added so much more to the series and enhanced the Baker Street Boys than she ever took away. I know not everybody loved Mary. She had her haters at several different points in the show for many different reasons, and if I were to put my tinfoil hat on, I wouldn't be shocked if that backlash was part of the reason why this happened, but I can't say for sure. But she also had many fans, including me. She created a dynamic mystery-solving team that had so much more potential, and a part of me will never be okay with it being taken away so soon. On the more nitpicky side of all all this, I did notice a couple of logistical issues with these events too. Like for one, how are there like 4 cops in this room, including Lestrade, and nobody tries to overpower the old lady pointing the gun at the famous detective? None of you want to charge in? Just gonna stand there and see what happens? Because I don't think it needs Sherlock Holmes to figure out what's gonna happen. I'm also not blind to the fact that the show decided to kill by far its best female character to enhance the story potential of their 2 male leads, which might skirt into woman in the fridge territory. However, I feel like figuring out if this really does fall into that trope is way too big a topic for this video, so I'm not even gonna try. I'm not saying there isn't a conversation to be had there most certainly is. I just don't feel equipped or interested enough to tackle it myself. However, The Take did a great video breaking down the trope and what it applies to that helped me look at the situation with Mary a bit better, so go check that out if you haven't. But how does this choice enhance the story potential with Sherlock and John? Well, naturally, everyone takes this really hard. The grief of it all is almost overwhelming in the last few minutes of the story. With Sherlock feeling the greatest failure he's ever had brought to the forefront in a very effective scene where he asks Mrs. Hudson to remind him of this if he ever gets too full of himself again. It's a quiet but powerful moment and ripped right from the ending of a Holmes story, The Yellow Face. John takes it especially hard and blames Sherlock for what happened to Mary, accusing him of not being able to protect her like he promised, shutting himself away and even having Molly give Sherlock a note since he doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. Weirdly, we never find out what's in the note, though people have theorized. It really leaves the episode on an uncertain beat. This changed everything in ways that we'll have plenty of time to talk about next episode, so I think this is a good place to leave things. Overall, I hate to spoil this early since we have a couple more episodes to go, but watching the whole series again, I think this is my least favorite episode of Sherlock. I hesitate to call it bad because it has a lot of the typical Sherlock strengths in there. Strong performances, witty dialogue, creative visuals, decent fan service, and playing on themes and character arcs the show is already firmly established. The problems come from the greater whole, the direction of the case, and certain creative decisions for the sake of creating character conflict. Say what you want about The Blind Banker, but even though it was a case that probably struggled to keep investment for a feature-length story, at least it was a cohesive case. Each piece logically led to the next. It's nothing special, but it works. Here, it feels like the script is taking any excuse it needs to get the story where they want it to be, trying to be ominous when really it's nonsensical. There's no logical progress here. It just felt to me like we got an answer to a piece of the puzzle because the script said so. There are also some things about it that teeter on the edge of being kinda cool and really ridiculous. From the kinda cool fight between Sherlock and AJ to the really ridiculous moment where you realize Sherlock is meeting Mary in secret in what I think is an abandoned castle. Does Sherlock have a secret hideout now? Why does he have this? Where is it? And why do we never see it again? Why didn't he just meet her at Baker Street? And as much as I like certain ways they built on the character relations they developed in season 3, some of it felt like we were taking 2 or 3 steps back rather than finding new conflicts moving forward. Maybe that's my problem with the episode. Aside from the end, we've done all this before, and it felt like we had moved on from it. But I guess not. You could argue that that's how we wound up with the ending we did, but I don't know. Even though there is some really good stuff in this episode, a lot of the choices here just don't really sit well with me. On the plus side, the lowest point for our detective and doctor might just lead to the highest point of season 4, and I'll explain how next time with The Lying Detective. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.